Welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Point? And once again, I've got a tremendous guest, and I look very much forward to hearing from him about his experience and what his journey has been to get to this point. My guest today is Scott Doyne. Scott is a professional coach. He's an author, keynote speaker, a former sports executive who has left that industry, which I find very intriguing. I want to hear about that. But importantly, he's the author of a book called Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis, a guide to navigating the 4 stages of career transition. Scott, hello, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate your time very much. And I know that myself and my listeners are going to enjoy hearing what you have to offer. First things first, because I am kind of a sports fanatic. Talk to us about your sports executive career and how that worked before we get into how you're transitioning from that.
Yeah, it really was a dream come true and so much more. I was a sports fan growing up in Cincinnati, all the way through college at Michigan, where I studied sports management. And then I got in the door at Turner Sports after doing a little bit of a production career. Got my MBA at Emory in Atlanta and spent 20 years at Turner Sports in digital product management roles, digital business roles. I ran a product strategy team, and in the last 4 years, ran a research and analytics function for TV, digital, web, and social. So NBA.com, NASCAR.com, March Madness, Bleacher Report, all part of our portfolio that I was really blessed to be part of.
So as a sports fanatic, you say you kind of lucked into it, or tell me how it really happened that you ended up at Turner Sports, because I mean, your education, your pedigree certainly makes sense. It sounds like, but walking into what a lot of us consider it kind of like a dream industry, if not a dream job, how'd that happen?
Yeah, for folks that aren't familiar with the sports industry, it is really tough, really competitive. Even though the business has grown tremendously, there's lots of companies, media networks, websites, apps. It's just competitive because people really like the idea of working in an area that they enjoy, which I appreciate. I think the other word that goes with that is internships. Lots of internships, several unpaid. That's unfortunately still the standard, although it's changing a bit, where there's some paid opportunities. I did some freelance production. So really the first 7 years of my career, I was not on benefits. I had unpaid internships, freelance production jobs, not a steady paycheck. And that's a privilege to be able to go into a space like that and take those risks. But it got me in the door. And then the MBA really catapulted me onto the business side of the industry and got into digital sports, 2001, 2002, when the internet was exploding. And that I just sort of rode that wave and was happy to be part of a group that kept adding digital properties to our portfolio. And we're really, really successful. So it was tough to get in, but once I was in, I refused to leave.
Oh, that's a great sentiment to share, that you weren't going to leave. So getting in, I still want to talk about that a little bit. Going in as an intern, either not paid at all or probably minimally paid, and like you said, without benefits, that is a risk. So I want to hear more about that, and I also want to hear how getting your MBA helped. Was it just the fact that set you apart from others, or was it the actual knowledge learned? So that whole scenario, I'm curious about.
Yeah, I'll start with the MBA and then go into my MBA internship and out of it. I was only going to go back to business school if it was at a top 25 school. So I applied to a small handful and made my way into Goizueta. I was already based in Atlanta at the time, so it just made a lot of sense. There's a real leadership initiative as part of the Goizueta Business School. So that really appealed to me, but it was only going to be worth the investment if it was a top school with a top pedigree. The benefits, I think, are threefold. One, the learning. So absolutely, I was in production before business school. I didn't have the typical undergraduate business degree. I learned sports management, but I got much more into things like negotiations or finance or, real good brand marketing courses. So the learning was important. The network was number two. And that is, all the people I know that I've gone to school with, that had gone there before. Emory's different than the Michigan network. Michigan is massive and really valuable in its own way. But Emory's a little smaller, but it has a tight community, and people that have been there are very proud of it. And so connecting with people the rest of my career, not just professionally, but as friends, mentors, advisors, peers. So I think the education and the networking combined to something I'll just sort of call confidence. That once I got into the workplace, I felt like I belonged among those executives that I was trying to be part of. And, I wanted to be a CEO someday. So it really gave me that springboard towards the education, the network, and the confidence to succeed. During that time, so my MBA was a 2-year period. A lot of folks take a summer internship. That's when I got my foot in the door at Turner. So my first opportunity was an unpaid internship during business school with CNN. And so CNN, digital business operations, very early internet, got to understand the dynamics of the business, the economics, the revenue streams, the potential of the mobile business, very early on. So I really got my feet wet, got in the door. While I was there that summer, I tried to meet every Emory grad I could find in the company, every MBA I could find in the company, and really did network my butt off during that time. Even helped organize a sort of first ever Emory alumni at Turner happy hour. So I got to be the organizer with a couple of alumni that were there to bring together a group and create some value for everybody. And that network of people I stayed around, I'm still in touch with so many of them today. So getting into that internship, get my foot in the door, create some value, learn a lot. And at that point, I had been there. And so second year came around, and second semester of second year, I had an opportunity to take a part-time job. So I was still in school, full-time during the day, when all classes are. But NASCAR.com had an opening for a part-time role to help with their digital products. And so I switched some of my classes to night classes and created some windows 2 or 3 days a week where I would go into the office. I did start getting paid hourly at the time, so I was very happy about that. And by the time I graduated, even though I had looked at other full-time offers, didn't have any. So fortunately, they at least raised up the number of hours I could work, raised my hourly pay a little bit. And by the time I got to the next January, we had our first child the same week that I got my first full-time job with benefits.
Wow. Big event, man. That's a big check mark on your timeline of life.
Yeah. Babies are lucky. That's what one of my mentors always said. And they were right.
That's very cool. You mentioned something that I want to dig a little deeper on or ask you to, and that is the power of networking. It is something that during my corporate career, I was not very proficient at and actually kind of repelled from it quite a bit. So tell us how you went about networking and how you were able to, number one, find the confidence. And number two, do it in such a way that you built a network as opposed to turning people off with this new young unpaid intern trying to stick his nose in.
I did some of that too, Bill. Don't worry.
I'm sure you did.
Definitely found the threshold, but I think innately I realize this more as I get older, right? That self-awareness starts to kick in. I enjoy connecting with people, period. I enjoy, I like people. I see the best in people. And so I think that relatability is a huge asset that I didn't necessarily know would be the perfect fit for this type of industry where who you know is more important than what you know. And so I think I had that advantage. The motivation, also innately in a way is like, I wanted to succeed. I am a hyperachiever. I always was, whatever that was going to look like. And so knowing that I got my foot in the door that summer and finding a way to connect with as many people as possible, I just was driven, and I knew that was part of the story. And so if that was the game and I was kind of inclined to know how to play it and enjoy playing it, I went after it. But that threshold, I think, is an interesting one because I don't think I was ever called a stalker, but I think I probably pushed too hard, here and there. And one of my mentors still to this day was the person I gave me the gift of that feedback was like, Scott, you're pushing a little too hard.
Yeah.
And in knowing that, I'm glad I did, because even the students or young folks that I coach today, you don't know when you've gone too far until you've gone too far. Not that
Right.
you want to do anything ridiculous, but if you haven't gotten to that point, there's still more to do.
That's a really good observation, and something not just for the young people that you coach and I coach, but for all of us at every stage, to know that there are limits, but we have to define those limits. And sometimes we have to push the limit to find out where the line is. With your sports background, the thought I just had in my head is you hear in sports, they play till the echo of the whistle. In other words, don't stop playing too soon. They're going to blow the whistle, but maybe a little bit further. And that sounds like what we have to do in life when we're pursuing most anything.
Yeah. And I think if we keep going with sports analogies, I could do it forever with you, is, you still can play the game your own way.
Mhm.
And I think that's one misconception of the networking side is, yes, it is relationship building, but you don't have to be the loudest one in the room. You don't have to be the one self-promoting, right? That's a turnoff for some people in terms of shining the light on themselves. But you may have advocates, you may have champions that are willing to endorse you.
Mhm.
And getting a solid referral on your page or recommendation on your LinkedIn page can be just as valuable, maybe even more so, than tooting your own horn. So I don't even think there's one way to do it. You have your own voice, you have your own comfort level. If you get the ball rolling, there is a sort of addiction to it that
Mhm.
people sort of get going once they have the momentum.
Yeah, and with my work in branding, I've always coached people that it's a balance between, they always say you have to fit in, but you also have to stand out.
Mhm.
So you've got to fit into whatever the corporate culture or the company culture or whatever it is, but you have to stand out. And you do that not by, like you said, being a stalker, but by going through your own, being yourself,
Yeah.
being yourself, right?
And connecting naturally. I've got a methodology that's in the book, and for people that are uncomfortable, I use the mnemonic ICAN, ICAN, and it's identify somebody, not just that you can get a job from or a recommendation from, but maybe somebody you can learn from. So
Yeah.
identify, C is connect. What is that personal item that you might have in common? The alma mater, the hometown, you saw them at a conference. The A is the ask. It's helpful to ask for something if you want something, but it can be time, it can be advice, it can be what their favorite podcast is. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
taxing on the other person. And then the N is navigate or next steps. So if
Yeah.
you can line up, 10 folks that you might want to network with, use that process, you'll learn from experimentation and see what messages work for you, see what approach feels comfortable, and maybe push the envelope a little bit to get yourself uncomfortable, but you don't have to not be yourself.
Yeah. Share your thoughts, your experience, please, Scott, on when you talk about connect. All too often, in my experience, people are looking to connect with self-interest.
Mhm.
What's your experience and what do you coach on giving connection, giving value?
I think that's a great point. I think there's always something to give, but I'm going to flip it a little bit because I know a lot of executives, a lot of people in roles that aren't having great days. And if on that day a young person reaches out to you and you have the opportunity to help them, it can be the best part of your day. It can
Mhm.
actually lift your spirits. And I'm optimistic and idealistic. I believe there's a lot of people out there that do want to help,
Yeah.
and you might be doing them a favor. So I think that's an important part of it. Not that it isn't give and take, but maybe think more about paying it forward in the future, that it's generational at some level. There is inevitably some imbalance. And I like the idea of reverse mentoring. There's something to learn from everybody,
Mhm.
absolutely. But I don't want to pretend that, a student reaching out to an executive, the student has to offer up something of value. I think what they offer is the opportunity for that other person to feel good that day.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you made it. Thank you. I think the biggest point I would want to make to anyone listening is don't go out of your way to give value because it's not expected, but be aware of the fact that it can be both ways, and that sometimes the best way we can connect with someone else is to do something in their behalf as opposed to asking or positioning something for ourselves. How did let me understand. You made quite a shift geographically from Cincinnati, leaving Ohio to go to that school up north, as Ohioans call it. So you're in the north. You're at a massive school, and then you end up in Atlanta, which is a whole different vibe and a whole different culture, and a much smaller school. Tell me how that all happened.
Yeah. So the short story is I met my wife in college, and she's from Miami. So after 4 years in Ann Arbor, we were ready to move south. Chicago was tantalizing. I think a lot of Michigan grads end up sticking around the Midwest, but it was just too cold. Also, to give you the timing, 96 was the Atlanta Olympics. So we graduated in 96, 97. And so moving down to Atlanta was on a lot of people's minds. It wasn't quite as southern as it had been, and I think it really became a melting pot and had a lot of sports stuff going on. So we chose to live roughly halfway in between Cincinnati and Miami. Start out on our own. We had enough friends here, and let's see, from 97 till 25, 28 years, we're still here.
Okay, cool. And so you kind of met a little bit halfway, but closer to the side of warmth.
It is that change of seasons, the appreciation when spring comes around. It's been a great home for us, and we've now raised two kids who are both in college, 19 and 21. So it's been an awesome place to have a family.
That's fabulous. Yeah. So you had that first job break, and now your child is 21 or in college, and that's quite a way to measure life, isn't it?
It sure is.
Speaking of culture differences, would your approach, and I can't think of a company that would be an analogy, so I'll try to just throw this at you. Was there a point when what you were doing to become engaged, successful, included into Turner, would that type of approach have worked in the Michigan area, in whatever company it would have been, or is it a different culture?
I think so. I think Midwest and South are more closely aligned. As I got into the Turner culture, there were geographical differences with our New York office or LA office for sure. And the New Yorkers are way more direct than I was used to growing up.
Yeah.
And I come to really respect that. A lot of our sales folks I was great partners with. We were building products and services that they could attach sponsorships to. So we really had to partner together, understand each other, understand what was possible or not possible, what the timing was, and resolve, any conflict with our partners. And so I had awesome partnerships with the folks in New York. So even though I wasn't working in New York, I think we found a lot of common ground. What I learned from them really applied more to management, learning to give critical feedback to employees. That was a real challenge for me, and something I really had to do a lot of training in. There's a book called Radical Candor that shook me up in a positive way that I'd recommend for folks that aren't quite sure how to go through that, the annual review process. But to me, being clear is kind. And, whereas that's part of my values is to be kind and nurturing, it doesn't mean to be avoiding the difficult conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for being honest, but there's a difference between being brutally honest and rigorously honest. I mean, it doesn't have to be brutal.
Yeah, you can bring heart to it for sure.
Yeah. In your positions, kind of on the administrative management inside, I'll call it workings, the behind the camera, behind the microphone workings, how much interaction were you able to have directly with sports and or athletes, or that thing that a lot of us are pretty much, everyone has this thing for athletes. They put them on a pedestal. Did you have much interaction with them, and what were some of your experiences?
Yeah, thanks for that. You're sending me down memory lane from the very beginning. So my first internship during college was with an organization called Pass Sports, which it's a regional sports network that eventually became one of the Fox Sports Detroits, or maybe it's Bally's at this point, but a regional sports network. And one summer, I was at about 80 Detroit Tigers games. And it was a year they lost 104. So it was a tough summer. I think I got my numbers off there, because if it was summer, it's probably just 50. but I got to be in the ballpark, walking around, helping the announcers. And that was sort of that firsthand view of some of my heroes, Cal Ripken and Ken Griffey Jr., two of them. Cal from the Orioles, the Iron Man, and Ken Griffey Jr., who went to high school right near where I grew up in Cincinnati. So seeing them, in real life was awesome. But we also began to work with them and put microphones on them. And, I understand the adoration, but over time, you realize they are just people. They have special skills, obviously. And even to the point, later in my career working at Turner Sports with the announcing staff, folks like Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal, right? Gigantic human beings in every way, physically and with their personalities. They're still people, and so the concept of the autograph sort of fades away. When you're that close. The concept of the pedestal fades away, and they are human beings. They have families. They have sensitivities. I always admired one of my bosses who had to be the one to give Shaq critical feedback about, how he talked on air. Because when he first got to us, I think this is written up in the Inside the NBA documentary. He mumbled sometimes, and not his fault. He just hadn't had that job before exactly. And my boss, who did play basketball, but was significantly shorter and smaller than Shaquille O'Neal, still had that management assignment. And I think that was another proof point that, treat people like human beings, be empathetic, but also be direct and clear, because people like that have achieved those heights athletically, that became announcers, they have aspirations of being great in the broadcast booth too. And so if you can give them the tools and the coaching, it's shown now that show has been the best show on TV, period.
Absolutely. And I hope they figure out keeping that on air somehow with all the contract changes that have happened. Literally big humans. Shaquille is just a giant, and Barkley is close. But I think you make a brilliant point, and it's true in sports, but it's also true in business. If you're hanging around, say you're at a corporation, TNT, or my background, Anheuser-Busch, and the executives walking around, you can get starstruck almost the same way, and without losing respect and without losing the same type of awareness of lines that we talked about earlier. It's good to see them as humans. Hopefully they're seeing you as a human as well, as opposed to just another asset.
Yeah, our sports management leaders absolutely were. David Levy, Lenny Daniels, the people that we reported to, they absolutely had great relationships. Even Mark Lazarus before them, who's now at NBC and NBC Sports. Absolutely. The higher sort of CEO types, the closer I got to some of that, the less I wanted to be one of those. I think mostly it was the travel. I did plenty of travel for sure, working in sports. But, as my family was growing up, I tried not to do too much and be around and help, with the family dynamics.
Let's talk about something that we all face, and that's moving on. You are not with Turner anymore. Before we go, did you ever meet Ted Turner?
I did once at his restaurant, actually. Yeah, Ted's in a grill downtown.
How was he?
Larger than life, 100%. His book was one of my favorites. Definitely a hero.
What's the name of his book?
Ted.
Oh, well, of course.
It's just Ted.
Beyond the Talks. Well, that's very cool. I'll talk to you more about that, maybe off camera. It got to the point that you either realized or had it pointed out to you that maybe it was time to take a different path. When that happened, whatever that point was, how did it happen? How do you handle it? And talk about the segue from that to where you are now.
Yeah, I did end up getting laid off. The cable business has gone through a lot of challenges, a lot less subscriptions. And so I had the benefit of about 9 months before having a sense it might be coming. Some signal finally penetrated that was like, oh, well, if that person can get laid off, then it's probably going to be me at some point.
Yeah.
And so that sent me into an exploration phase. So, this is part of the 4 stages I address in the book, sort of retroactively realize as the light bulb that a change might happen, or you might want to make a change. Explore is the second step. And for me, the way I started with that was journaling. What might I want to do? This was right after the pandemic. So I was thinking a little bit more about legacy and purpose and that sort of stuff. My kids were about to leave the house. I was going to be turning 50. So all that sort of coincided to me wanting something different out of my next, let's say, 20 years. And then I ended up having a session with an executive coach. And in that session, I really got a lot of value from it and some clarity I didn't have previously. And then I also looked across the camera like we're doing today. And I said, I think I can do that.
Yeah.
And so I began training in advance of my layoff. So then when it did happen, I had a lot of my business plan written. I was almost certified, did a little bit more research, built the LLC, and I launched 3 months after layoff.
Excellent. So let me get back to the book is Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis, which you and I both went through. Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis, a guide to navigating the 4 stages of career transition. And you just spoke to 2 of them. The 4 stages are realize, explore, articulate, activate. Up to you. Talk about it. Let us know what that means.
Yeah. So you got a sense of the first 2. The realize is it's time for a change, or it's been an involuntary change. Sometimes that's very sudden and difficult. Explore is what might I want to do? What are my strengths and interests? But also what's out there and how my strengths and interests intersect with demand or what I think the world needs. Once you have a sense of that or a hypothesis, maybe even a couple, you can proceed to articulation. This is how now I tell my story. You're the branding expert, right? How do you sort of get the right words, the right message in front of the right people? So that's the articulation part of it. Then you've got your story straight, you can go to market. So now you're launching yourself as the product. That's activation. And once you've gone into that mode, hopefully you get some data back. It could be you found a job and you get some data back about whether you like or don't like that job. It could be the job search and you're getting data back from interviews or not getting interviews. And you can feed that back into the system where you might have to re-explore some areas, or you might just re-articulate some things. But that then becomes the cycle, once you've gone through realize, explore, articulate, activate. It's something that, for better or worse, there is perpetual transition now. There will be change. And once people have gone through it once, you kind of don't have to remind them that their next thing might be temporary. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to give people the impression that they need to have one foot out at all times. I never felt that way. I didn't want to leave. But at the same time, I had to be my own advocate and I had to feel prepared. And so that's where this model comes in, no matter what life stage you're in, is to have some notes, to have some thoughts, to have a list of people you might talk to if you end up in a difficult situation. And that way you're more prepared for a successful transition.
That brings an analogy perhaps is, going to any city. You shouldn't be afraid, but you should be aware. Mm-hmm. And you don't want something bad to happen. But if you have given it some thought and, done some exploration, some research, to know where to go and what not to go. Does that make sense? That type of
it does. Yeah, I like the compass a lot when it comes to that sort of metaphor. It's more of a compass than a roadmap to me. A roadmap is very specific. Mm-hmm. And I think society is maybe telling folks that they're supposed to know exactly what they want to do the rest of their life. And I think that's an illusion. Like, you can have some level of conviction, but the goalposts are also going to change. Yeah. And so the compass at least can orient you in a certain direction, give you some focus so that, let's say you are doing network, you can do it in a direction of your hypothesis. And that at least makes your time more efficient. And if you end up with data that says, maybe look at something else, well, shift gears, readdress, and then focus again. Because at the end of, how I work with people, a few weeks or months down the road, I want them to look back at the time we've spent together and at least be able to say they've been smart about that process. They've been strategic and intentional. Mm-hmm. Because we don't control the outcomes, but you do control the inputs.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on potentially just having a different point of view? And what I mean by that is, all too often we look at and we're asked by others, what do you do? Yeah. And we define ourselves by what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And when the time comes for change, oftentimes a lot of people I work with are looking just to do the same thing because it's what they've done. Yeah. And I try to work with people and say, what you do is what you do, but who do you want to be? Is that a different point of view? Do you come across that? Do you coach that?
It's different and it's difficult. What you're talking about is identity.
Yeah.
And who people are is tied up in what they do, and their self-worth sometimes then is dictated by others. So I do think there's a mental process there. In some cases, just in fairness, I think therapists are better able to handle that situation. But I end up in discussions where sometimes it's more psychological and thinking about, what type of manager you want to be, what type of parent do you want to be, who do you want to be remembered as? I think those are important questions as you sort of open the funnel to possibilities, but then narrow down to, what is it you're going to do professionally, as compensation is certainly part of this story for everybody, or maybe not everybody, but that's usually a part of the conversation. And so whereas identity can be wrapped up in your company, I do think one benefit of the layoff is it shocks your system enough that your attachment to that corporate entity is shattered. And so, you don't have a choice. So I actually think there's a value to involuntary termination versus a lot of folks I work with that are still in role. Not only is it tough to find the time to be looking and pursuing something, it's tough to be open-minded and have the mental bandwidth. You've got your life, you've got your job. How much time is there to even be exploring? And the benefit for me when I had that light bulb early on was I entered into this open-minded space, and whether it's journaling or coaching, that creates the opportunity for the epiphany of what is it you might pursue next.
Yeah. All good stuff. And yeah, being shocked into a different perspective is personal experience. Yes.
Mhm.
It definitely can shatter some thoughts. What I meant when I said separating what you do from who you want to be, to me, I talk to people about identifying your core values,
Mhm.
identifying what's important to you. And you mentioned it earlier. One of the things I talk to people about is exactly what you said when you pointed out that you didn't want to travel that much because you wanted more time with your family, that kind of thing. So when people are looking at a new opportunity or their existing opportunity, or is the environment they're in conducive to who they want to be and what their core values are and what their real internal drivers are? Because yeah, we all want to do the best job we can. I believe most people want to do the best job they can, want to advance, want to make money. But I also think that is maximized when we're in a position that we're also fueling our own needs and wants.
Right. That hopefully your corporate environment embraces, not just
Hopefully.
tolerates.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Some
I
do.
mean, I don't mind an ideal aspiration. It's a shoot for the stars and land on the moon sort of thing for
Yeah.
me. But I don't think I could end up at this part of my career any differently, given the joy I've had and the fulfilling nature of not just working in sports, which was the dream, but among people I respected and people that trusted me. And so I know I'm probably on the jaded side of that, but if people can at least open the door to the possibility of pursuing something that fits, who they want to be holistically, maybe they don't find it 100%, but if they can experience a fraction of the fulfillment I had, I think they at least know they've tried to go after that. Or in some cases, find that side hustle that pairs with your corporate life. And I see a lot of that happening now with younger folks.
You talked about voluntary or involuntary separation, we'll call it, from a job, from a career. What was the sharpest point of that to you? What hit you the hardest? I mean, you had the benefit of at least a premonition that it's coming, but still, I mean, you might know you're going to get hit in a sporting event or something, but it's like Mike Tyson said, you can have the greatest plan in the world till you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
What was the sharpest point for you in that whole separation process?
Yeah, you're definitely testing my sunny side up disposition, Bill. It's true. Being laid off will never feel like a compliment. Absolutely.
Right.
And I think it took some time for me to even let some of that soak in. I am positive. I do, think about possibilities. I don't have that sort of negativity vibe. I don't know why. I was born with it, and I think it probably annoys the shit out of people. But but with that said, I think it happened afterwards. And what I missed about being in the corporate environment, because I love being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of great things to the autonomy, flexibility, control, service, but I miss having colleagues a ton.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was taken away from me, the ability to have coworkers, go down to the cafeteria, run into a bunch of friends. That's a part of my life that I mourn. And I'm still trying to rebuild that informally through coaching relationships and partnerships and friends and alumni and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that in my experience was kind of why there was such a boon in coffee shops, at least pre-COVID, because go work in a coffee shop because at least you're not alone. In
Yeah.
particular, if you come from a bigger business environment, whether it's 10 people or 1,000 people, if you and I are home alone, which is where we both work, it can get like, where is everybody? I want some
I
human
really
connection.
think so. I think we're seeing a lot of that in retirement. And, that's not a topic I've tackled yet, but I'm very curious about it and starting to do some research on, what happens to that, sort of happiness or satisfaction when you're out of the workplace, and how do you find other ways of staying engaged socially, mentally, physically?
Yeah, and that's a very essential, I think, area, a fertile area for people that do coaching like you and I. I talk about where are you on the ladder of success, and the people at the very top of the ladder are either so lonely they have no one to talk to, and or it's what's next, and or what's my legacy, and all these things start to change perspective when you get there. The other two stages, just so you know, somewhere in the middle of the ladder, help me get up faster, help me learn this. And then what my situation was, I tell people my ladder was against the wrong building for a long time.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to realize that. So yeah, the whole idea, and believe me, it's much more relevant to me than you at this point, of retirement and what do you do and how do you feel, all of that. It's a very important area for us to take a look at. Uh, we spoke a couple of weeks ago when we were getting to know each other, and at the same time, for those of you that are listening, just let me remind you, I'm talking to Scott Doyne. He's an executive coach. He's the author of Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis, a guide to navigating the 4 stages of career transition. All of his contact information, how to find his book, try Amazon. And it will help you whether you're currently in a midlife crisis or whether you don't even think you'll ever be in one. It's filled with such good information. So check out Scott and share this with people that you know that are in a crisis or approaching a crisis. Please hit like, hit share, because Scott brings a lot of value. When we're talking earlier, and I was also going to say, those of you that are listening, if you get to the YouTube channel, you can see behind Scott, there's 2 things I want you to speak to. And one's over your left shoulder. It's a small, almost book-sized card. And over your right shoulder is a bigger print. Tell us what those are.
Yeah. So the book is here. You see the book, and that's what we've been talking about. Is that what you mean, or you mean above that?
Yeah, okay. Honestly, it's a little bit far away, and I reckon I didn't know if it was like a miniature replication, but yeah, that is the book.
What's interesting about the book and the sort of ocean image above it, both are sort of like happy places for me, because there's a sunset, or is it a sunrise on the book cover? You decide. In the ocean, for me, there's a peacefulness about both of those that hopefully my clients feel that peace. Over this shoulder is Ikigai, a Japanese concept written in calligraphy. And that's some of what we were talking around earlier, that intersection of strengths, interests, demand, and what the world needs. It's a structure I did not invent. It's been around for a while. And it's based on the fact that Japanese, in Japanese, the word means purpose or reason for being. And theoretically, that can live at the intersection of these 4 circles. what I use it as is a workshop or a journaling exercise or a coaching session where we talk through those 4 buckets. And inevitably we have a conversation about, what might that intersection be? How do you apply your skills and interests? Or how do you build skills in your areas of interest? Or where do you see demand in the future in general? And how do you skate to where that puck is going? Or if you want to go into that society bucket, how do you find companies that have those values or have foundations with the causes that you're most interested in? So it's a useful technique. And I was lucky enough to be in Japan to take a calligraphy course. And so that's now a permanent resident in the Zoom.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, Japan is on my bucket list. I've been doing a lot of travel lately, my wife and I, but Japan's on each of our bucket list. It was interesting. I love a lot of the Eastern philosophy, and people may have missed the fact that you just slipped in another sports analogy when you said you want to skate where the puck's going. It's always sports going.
That's right. You do the hockey stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting close to time. I don't want to run much longer than I promised you we would have. But the Eastern philosophy, when I was talking about getting confused about, we're defined by our job. A Western philosophy, at least a U.S. philosophy, is, if I can get this right, it's kind of like do, have, be. What do you do? From doing that, you have whatever you have, and that's who you are. But an Eastern philosophy is be, do, and have. So if you're being who you are and do what that brings you to do, you're going to have what makes you happy. So it's subtle, but that's kind of the difference I was trying to talk about earlier of knowing who you want to be and who you are, and then pursuing what you can to help fulfill that. Was there a point in your life that you were given advice that you either were two questions in one? Point in your life, you're given advice. One, you're so grateful that you got that advice and it's really impacted your life in a positive way. Some advice that they were giving you in their best, and you're so glad you didn't take it because it would have been horrible.
Oh, I've got a funny one for the second one. So the advice I've been given that has meant the most to me, I'll just give to my mother. It's be kind. That to me, I feel like I've been as true to that as I can be throughout my personal and professional career. Whether it was being loyal to my bosses or treating my employees with respect or giving dignity to peers who, deserved a chance to shine instead of me one day. So I think that's really important. And then the funny story I'll tell you was when I was having that internship at CNN, and somebody said, well, if you want to go make friends with the executives, you have to go down to the smoking lounge. I did not take that advice. And so, yes, there's a limit to networking is the moral of that story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's wind this up. Is there anything that you expected me to ask you that I didn't, that you'd like to expand upon?
Oh, wow. That's an excellent question. I think you covered the gamut, Bill. You're an excellent host. So I'll just let that stand.
Well, thank you for that. We'll cut that clip out and publish it everywhere. Well, I have one more question for you, and it's something I ask every one of my guests, and you can define this in whatever context you choose to define it. But as the title of the podcast says, what's the point, Scott?
Help others. Help others.
Simple, powerful, and I couldn't agree more. Scott, you've been a delight. I hope everyone goes out and gets their copy of Exploring the Midlife Crisis, a guide to navigating the 4 stages of career transition, which happen to be realize, explore, articulate, and activate. Check out Scott's information in the show notes. Again, like the episode, share the episode, subscribe. It helps me to continue to get powerful guests with great messages like Scott and others that you've heard. So, Scott, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you sharing so much for me and my listeners.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise there is value to be gained in every one. Taking a second to rate, review, and share the show helps make us more discoverable and enables others to find out what's the point. If you'd like to learn more about Bill Ellis and his services, please visit his website, billellis.com. See you next time.